UFC 296 went down over the weekend. A big-time pay-per-view to end the year on for the UFC. Huge main card. Plenty of title implications, as well as 2 title fights on the card, 125 pounds, 170 pounds. Both ended up being retained, but 3 other big-time fights for their respective divisions, and a big-time weekend for some big-time fights, as most of these went to decision. I did watch most of the prelims. Cody Garbrandt with a huge knockout of Brian Kelleher, but really just kind of a rundown of kind of what went down on Saturday night, as well as kind of where we're going from here, and just a few things that I kind of like notated, essentially kind of looking around, and just to start right in on this with the main card. Looking at Josh Emmett and Bryce Mitchell, that was an absolutely insane knockout of Bryce Mitchell by Josh Emmett. And Josh Emmett just reminded everybody the power that man has in his hands. That man has thunder in his hands. And after the fight, rough to see anybody go out that way, and just the shaking that Bryce Mitchell had after that knockout. That was the way he went down, though. Just even the video that the UFC posted on social media of him going down was just insane. Like, you knew how hard he got hit. I actually haven't seen the actual highlight of him hitting him yet. So, and like I said, kind of just giving a rundown, because I didn't watch most of these fights. The main card I didn't actually get to see too much of. I watched a little bit of the Ferguson-Pimblett fight, but, that's either here nor there. My stream kept getting messed up on that one, but tough night for Tony Ferguson, really. And an interesting thing that, I'll just go up the card, and we'll get into that in a minute, but Paddy Pimblett getting the win, unanimous decision over Tony Ferguson, and a big-time win for Paddy to get back in the win column, to get back to kind of building that hype, that momentum, trying to get up into the, topper echelon of the flyweight, or the lightweight division, excuse me. Also had a huge welterweight bout, Shavat Rakhmonov with a big second-round finish. It ended up getting a submission on Wonderboy, as more I'll get to in a second. But flyweight title fight, decision. Both title fights went to a decision, all 10 rounds being used on these 2 championship fights. Alessandre Pantoja with the victory over Brandon Royval, as well as Leon Edwards getting the unanimous decision win over Colby Covington in a big-time welterweight matchup. And that leads us to the Colby Covington conversation, because at this point, Colby Covington has had 3 shots at the welterweight title, twice against Kamaru Usman and once against Leon Edwards now. And I think it's kind of safe to say that at 35, looking at the downside of his career at this point, probably, I doubt Colby Covington gets another shot. It was actually interesting, I thought, afterwards, to see him call out Stephen Thompson. And I haven't seen the exact exchange or what exactly was said between the two. I know at the press conference, Covington was kind of angling towards Thompson, which, he's coming after everybody, essentially, as, Ian Gary wasn't even there. And he still caught a couple of strays. Obviously, he was supposed to be on this card, and that's been a huge topic around UFC 296, where Ian Gary and, of course, the whole situation going on with his wife and Sean Strickland, and it seems like just everybody is in that Ian Gary drama at this point. And with him not being able to deliver in fighting, as he was supposed to fight Vicente Luque, and Luque, he did not get a backup opponent, so Luque missed this card. So tough break for Ian Gary, and we'll see. And I think Paddy Pimblett kind of on this card just shows to a point, it's the fight is what matters at the end of the day. You can lose the fans outside of the cage, you can lose the fans, but when it comes to inside the cage and when you're fighting, and if it's exciting and it's what the fans want to see, I think that you can win, fans back with, just what you can do inside that cage, or inside the octagon. So we'll see what happens with Ian Gary. I'm not going to get too much into that, but back to the Colby Covington issue, just with with Covington, it's funny, he called out Tony Ferguson during the press conference. They kind of started going back and forth, and then ended up in this weird, pro-America thing with both of them going back and forth, getting hype. But it just interested me kind of thinking about it afterwards, and the fact that Colby Covington and Tony Ferguson are about in the same boat. Were at the top of their game, both, and both ended up being interim champions. But neither one ever solidified being a, man, why can I not think of the word right now off the top of my head? But a world champ, an undisputed world champ. There you go. But neither one undisputed world champ, both interim champions. And obviously Tony Ferguson right here at the twilight of his career. I think that's 8 losses in a row. I think 8. I think it was 7. It was either 6 or 7 coming in. So it's either 7 or 8 losses in a row, I want to say, for Tony Ferguson, which, most of us MMA fans absolutely breaks our heart. We wanted to see him come back and beat Paddy Pimblett over the weekend, and that is not what we got. We got more of the rising star of Paddy Pimblett. I'm excited to go back and actually watch the fight and kind of break down to see how that fight went out. As I said, I'm just kind of giving you guys a rundown. Just because I wanted to run my mouth about some UFC stuff, I guess, about some MMA, really, at the end of the day. But the comparison between Colby and Tony, I think, is very on point, just because the more I thought about this, the more I thought that, they were both right there, and just for whatever reason, the game just kind of decided to, I don't want to say pass them by, but just not give them the opportunity to kind of, get, I guess in Tony's case, more so than Colby, because, Colby's had 3 cracks at the belt. At this point, where do you go? And where does that welterweight division go? Rachmanov is not ranked currently. And him beating Wonder Boy, I kind of wonder where that kind of puts him at in the mix. I'm going to go ahead and get into the rankings. Just kind of see. I don't know when the last time I've actually looked at rankings. So you had Colby Covington at 3. Usman's still number 1 in the welterweight rankings. Bilal Muhammad at number 2. Gilbert Burns. Okay, Rachmanov was number 5. I don't know why it didn't show on the page that I was looking at. So he just beat number 6 Wonder Boy. Rachmanov has a gripe to get that next title shot. Bilal Muhammad, obviously, he's had, as many wins as he has in a row. Let me see. Let's go ahead and check that right now. Exactly where he's at. So 5 in a row after the Leon Edwards fight, of course, where the eye poke came into play. So, even if you're not counting that. That's 7. 7 in a row. Doesn't look like he's lost since he fought George Neal back in 2019. Hope I'm right on that. Fought Dirty Bird at one point. George Neal. Jeff Neal, that's my bad. But it's just Bilal Muhammad, man. He might be the most boring fighter in the UFC at this point. Almost reminds you of John Fitch, I feel like. I honestly haven't watched Bilal Muhammad fight a ton. But I saw a meme the other day just about with Bilal Muhammad. There's a dude boxing a tree, and it said Bilal Muhammad would have taken him to the distance for a decision. Either way, nonetheless, Bilal Muhammad's last fight was Gilbert Burns. That was May 6th of this year. Try to see, UFC 288. I do remember that. Had a good fight. 132 to 81 on the total strikes. Or on significant strikes. Anyway, so the welterweight division is somewhat a mess, I think. And the only reason I say it's somewhat of a mess because, you don't really have anybody with star power at this point, especially not contending where you would like them to. This would have been a huge chance for Ian Gary to get up there in the rankings, as he was supposed to face number 9 Vicente Luque. But other than that, I mean, you just don't have a ton of star power. I mean, Kamaru Usman's coming off the middleweight loss. Obviously, you already lost to Leon Edwards twice. And they've had a whole trilogy at this point, so it's hard to justify a Kamaru Usman, coming back into the title picture at 170. Really, at the end of the day, you've got Bilal Muhammad, you've got Rakhmonov, and that's about it. Let's see with Gilbert Burns. I think he has returned since No, he hasn't. He has not returned since the Bilal Muhammad loss. So even there, that's quick back-to-back, too. I do think I remember Gilbert Burns took that on short notice because that was just a month after he beat Jorge Masvidal, of course. So, I mean, Gilbert Burns is still somewhat in that mix as well, in the top of the 170 discussion on who would even get that next title shot. But it's thin in star power, really, at the end of the day. Just, we'll see where it goes. Because the top 10, you've got Usman 1, Muhammad 2, Covington 3, Gilbert Burns 4, Rakhmonov at 5, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson at 6, Sean Brady at 7, Jeff Neal at 8, Vicente Luque at 9, and then you've got Ian Machado Gary at 10, of course, rounding out that top 10 and the welterweight division. So it'll be really interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see where Covington goes after this, because with him calling out Wonderboy, I feel like that's a good fight. That's a solid fight, especially after them both coming off of losses. I don't see a real problem with that fight, but it also, to me, I think both of those guys, Wonderboy mentioned fighting for a world title this week, and I think for both of those guys, they both kind of think they'll get to that point, but it's kind of one of those fights where it's like, we're watching two former contenders fight, and it's going to be a good fight, but it is what it is, former contenders, and I just don't see that Covington will ever get back to this point, and he may be able to just off of the fact that there's really no star power at welterweight right now, absolutely none really at this point. So we'll see what ends up happening, what ends up developing, and going into a new year, and getting the chance to kind of refresh and see what we'll get for 2024. It'll be interesting, the outlook of the welterweight division, to say the least. So another one mentioning the welterweight division, I saw for UFC 299 that Michael Venom Page will make his UFC debut, long awaited, which actually caught me by surprise, because I swear I saw where he was signing with PFL, and I swore that was an official thing, but apparently he will get... I thought that was very interesting, just kind of go with what's been going on with PFL and the UFC. Dana White has been talking a lot about the PFL, with the PFL getting the deal done with Bellator and taking on Bellator for the next, I think, year or two. They're planning to run separate shows as Bellator and PFL, and then eventually work to integrate all of it. But they've got a lot of star power at the end of the day, a lot of talent that Bellator has built up. A lot of talent from, the UFC coming down to, coming away from the UFC to either Bellator or the PFL. A lot of former UFC names in the PFL. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens moving forward with the PFL and Bellator and where they go from there. But MVP, I swear I saw something on a PFL account or something to that effect, that Michael Venom Page was going to the PFL, and I thought it was kind of funny just because, it seemed like Dana White had been hyping up the MVP signing and the fact that it was going to happen eventually, but he will get Kevin Holland in his first fight at UFC 299 is the plan, and I couldn't see a better matchup, really. And with MVP being 36 years of age right now, I think it's a perfect place for him to start, because I don't think that you really expect MVP to compete for a title in the UFC, but there is an outside shot. And just having that conversation of, like I was just saying, there's really not a lot of star power in the welterweight division. So if MVP can come in and knock off a guy like Kevin Holland, fairly, in a fairly handed performance, I do think that MVP could possibly maybe make a run. maybe within the year. UFC 299, I don't know where that falls on the calendar exactly, but we're at 296, so we're probably the next couple of months, I would assume. It says it'll be the Miami card. I'm trying to see exactly what date that is, or what month that's going to put MVP at. Kevin Holland's 31. So it's definitely very possible. The matchup first leaked via an image of the UFC's matchmaking room during the Full Send podcast with the UFC CEO, of course, Mr. Dana White. I still don't see a date on this. Oh, well. So that's planned on the same night that Sugar Sean O'Malley will meet Marlon Chito Vera. Ian Gary is scheduled to meet Jeff Neal that night, it says here. Let's see when exactly this is from MMA Junkie I'm reading off of right now. But this was just posted in the last couple of days. So it looks like Gary's going to turn around pretty quick and meet Jeff Neal, which will be good for him. To get a chance to kind of, get a little bit of fan support back, I guess would be the best way to put that. But so moving on to more from 296, just stories that I kind of picked up from that. Going with Paddy Pimblett. So Paddy Pimblett, Rafael Dos Anjos had tweeted something out saying the hype is real. He was being sarcastic, and not Pedro Munoz, Rafael Dos Santos. He is scheduled to fight Gamrot on this UFC 299 card, is what it's saying. Trying to see where Gamrot is in the standings. It's number 6 in the standings. And then you got Dos Anjos right outside the top 10 at number 11. Rafael Dos Anjos, perfect kind of gatekeeper, kind of fighter at this point in his career. Of course, he's former champ. He's the one that dethroned Anthony Pettis, of course. And with Paddy Pimblett, and I think that's a perfect fight for RDA to somewhat stay relevant, but then also give Paddy that next test that he really needs to kind of break into that top 10 exposure of, real contenders, starting to move through some real contenders, because this lightweight division, this lightweight division is different. I don't know if there's any other division in the UFC that has quite the lineup that this lightweight division has. Just looking at the top 15 right now and all of these names, Charlie Oliveira, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Beneil Dariush is still hanging around in there, Dan Hooker, all these are tough fights. RDA at 11, that is a tough fight. Moicano is still up in the top 15, Bobby Green, Drew Dobers at 15, so there's definitely, obviously I didn't go over every single name, but in this top 15, but a definite, very tough division for Paddy Pimblett to navigate through, and I think RDA would be a perfect next test, especially if he can. I don't know if you would want to pair him up with Paddy more so if he beat Gamrot or if he lost to Gamrot at this point. Just because if you're beating Gamrot, that's number 6. Paddy is not ranked. I don't know if that'll change tomorrow. After beating Tony Ferguson, but Tony Ferguson's not ranked on this list either. So, but I think a perfect little fight just to have, build some hype up, give Paddy that performance that he needs to break into that competition, and you start pairing him up with bigger and bigger names and try to work him towards that title status if he's going to get there. Because then, of course, the fighter has to do their part as well and, get these wins and keep moving along. But again, kind of going back to Paddy, it seems like he's kind of won back a lot of fan support, which, is a lose-lose situation for Paddy Pimblett. I think you're talking about a legend, an all-time favorite with pretty much all the fans unanimously, I feel, in Tony Ferguson. And you're basically taking him out behind the shed, Ole Yeller style, and trying to end this man's career at this point. Like I said, Tony Ferguson had, 5-6 losses in a row coming into this fight. So very tough night for Tony Ferguson. A tough one to kind of reassess exactly where he's going to be at and what his real plans are moving forward. Obviously, the Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis big time brawl out there in the crowd. Dana White, I saw a little bit about it where Dana said he felt like it was kind of his fault. But I mean, yeah, Dricus was 3-4 rows behind Sean Strickland. And Sean Strickland's one of those dudes, it seems like he is going to at any moment, Dricus kind of made a jokingly, come at me, bro, kind of movement, and Strickland put his drink down and hopped right over, and he obliged. So, and I think that's just Sean Strickland. He's just that dude. Like, he's not gonna back down, and especially with the cameras on, everybody's watching. At this point, and being the champion at this point. I mean, I think he would have done this before if he wasn't the champ, but also being the champ, I feel like there's a bit of a reputation to uphold for Sean Strickland. I think he feels at this point, and it's a fight game. It is what it is. I don't think that it's as bad as obviously the Khabib Conor situation where there's this huge brawl between the fighters, and at least this was all kind of to talent that was not involved in fights this evening. It seems like they got it all addressed pretty quickly, so that's just going to add to the hype of this fight coming up. And I'm actually pretty excited to watch it because Sean Strickland, it's going to be a very interesting matchup, and we will go more into detail about that, I'm sure, later on down the road at some point on this podcast right here. So really that is pretty much it from UFC 296. Kind of just wanted to get on here, kind of talk about to go back to one more thing, but just to finish that up, I just wanted to get on here and kind of give my thoughts on the weekend and just these fights and what we're going to see moving forward. And but going back to Colby Covington one more time, just because right after the fight, he said he didn't take any damage. He felt like he won 3 of the rounds. He's definitely angling towards an either immediate rematch or, something of that sense. I think that Colby is just in a place where, his brain's kind of scrambling. He's not sure what to do. And it's kind of that whole situation like with Chael Sonnen. I was just watching something about Chael the other day, just how he was discussing how he was always the runner-up. He was good enough to get to number 2, wasn't good enough to be the champ, whether that was, wrestling, in the UFC, in, WEC, all that. So I think this is a situation where Colby's he's going to have to figure out exactly who he is. I think just a lot of reflecting, like personal, and a lot of mental going into that, because he just keeps coming up short, and now at 35, and probably on the back end of your career. And then, I mean, even Dana White said in the post fight is he looked old and he looked slow, so not a good assessment from the boss really at that point. So really, that's all I had to say. Like I said, I just want to get on here, kind of give some of my brief thoughts and takes on UFC 296 over the weekend, and kind of dive more into the MMA realm, just because, MMA is such a big part of my life, and I really enjoy watching these fights and breaking it down and all that good stuff. Obviously, with the pay-per-views being $80 a purchase, I'm not buying most of these pay-per-views. Actually, funny story, the last pay-per-view I bought was Jorge Masvidal, Kamaru Usman 1. And probably wouldn't have bought that one if it wasn't for the shutdowns, but I was so hyped to see that. And then we watched Kamaru Usman pretty much hold Masvidal up against the cage and stomp his foot for 5 rounds. It was what it was, but definitely frustrating to pay $80 to see that. But didn't get out and around to watch these fights live, but I'll definitely check them out on the back end at some point. I'm actually getting ready to go back and watch UFC 295. Because I haven't watched through those fights yet, but definitely very excited to kind of see how that went down with Prochazka and Pereira, as well as Tom Aspinall. I definitely felt very confident in Tom Aspinall going into that fight, but nonetheless, if you listen to this podcast, I really appreciate it. Wherever you listen to it, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, the YouTube channel Papa Shro, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, as well as follow along on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.